Good Times was a lot more than just a sitcom set in the ghetto. The show had a message, an important message that wasn't really meant for me, an Asian kid growing up in the suburbs of Chicago. And there was one plot point that I really misunderstood at 9 years old, when they killed off the character of James Evans, the father in the family.
Damn!
I literally thought John Amos had died. But as it turns out, millions of other viewers also failed to fully understand his departure, but for a very different reason. John Amos, and eventually Esther Rolle, left Good Times over a battle that centered on one character and one iconic catchphrase.
A Dyn-o-mite!
Buffalo butt. Mr. Bookman. When Good Times first appeared on American TV sets in 1974, the show had two main goals. John Amos, who played the man of the house, James Evans, explained in an interview, "We want to make some thoughtful statements about the black experience, and we think it's important to show a healthy black family life. But most of all, we'd like to be funny." So there it was. Priority number one, be funny, the primary goal of all sitcoms. But also show America what a healthy black family looks like. The goal of being funny was nothing new, but up until Good Times first aired, primetime network television had never focused on a black nuclear family with mother, father, and children all living under the same roof. American TV audiences were used to seeing black families that had only one parent, and Good Times was originally going to continue that trend. But Esther Rolle, who we all fondly remember as Florida Evans, insisted that her character have a husband. And according to John Amos, when he auditioned for the role of James Evans, Esther Rolle looked at executive producer Norman Lear and said, "He'll do just fine. I'd like him to be my husband." It was an easy choice despite John Amos being 19 years younger than Rolle. After all, Amos had already played Rolle's husband on the series Maude, where Rolle played the housekeeper. Both of the creators of Good Times were black. They were Eric Monte and Mike Evans, and Evans would later play Lionel on The Jeffersons. But according to several cast members, including Rolle and Amos, the writers of Good Times were mostly white men. Both Esther Rolle and John Amos understood the deep significance of Good Times, that the show was groundbreaking in how it would portray black family life. And for this reason, Esther Rolle had one demand that she made very clear to the writers: don't demean this family. And the writers listened. The kids may have strayed here and there because that's what kids do, but the writers made sure that the parents, in particular James Evans, were too proud to accept charity and too honorable to break the law in the name of supporting their struggling family. What Good Times showed America was a black family that stuck together as they dealt with serious problems that are especially prevalent in poor inner-city neighborhoods. Various episodes dealt with gang violence, alcoholism, drug addiction, racism, and more. They even did a 4-part story arc about a girl who was being physically abused by her mother, and that little girl was played by 11-year-old Janet Jackson. But even when the plot lines got heavy, Good Times kept things light with comic foils such as the neighbor who I swore was named Willona, and it turns out I had her name wrong for decades. Willona Woods was played by Janae DuBois, who served up incredibly funny zingers just about every time she walked into frame. And a side note for the trivia buffs, DuBois went on to co-write and sing the Movin' On Up theme song for The Jeffersons. Getting back to Good Times, another source of laughs was Buffalo Butt. Mr. Bookman, the incompetent building superintendent who frequently visited the Evans family to yell at them for one reason or another. The biggest laughs, however, came from JJ, played by comedian Jimmie Walker. While BernNadette Stanis and Ralph Carter played Thelma and Michael as high achievers who had big dreams, the character of JJ took nothing seriously, and an episode of Good Times wasn't complete until he shouted,
A Dyn-o-mite!
The irony of J.J. Evans was that his catchphrase and overall goofiness made him the star of the show, but cast members, critics, and even Jimmie Walker himself couldn't stand the character. TV critics praised Good Times for how it portrayed the Evans family as poor, but also proud and honest. but when it came to J.J. Evans, the critics were merciless, calling his character a punk, a clown, and a buffoon. They even attacked Jimmie Walker himself, calling him an utterly hopeless actor and the least impressive of the whole cast. As the first season of Good Times got underway in 1974, Jimmie Walker publicly talked smack about the character he played as well as the series as a whole. He didn't like that people on the street expected him to say Dyn-o-mite all the time, and he really had very little in common with the character he played. And about Good Times itself, Walker said, "Nope, I don't think Good Times has a chance. I'll be glad when I'm free and not in this hassle anymore." But despite his feelings about the character, Jimmie Walker played the role of JJ to the best of his ability, and Good Times did well in its first 2 seasons. And during that time, writers were expanding JJ's presence on the show in hopes of boosting the ratings, and this did not sit well with Rolle or Amos. In 1976, Jet magazine printed a scathing quote that they attributed to Esther Rolle. "JJ is 18 and he doesn't work. He can't read and write. He doesn't think. Negative images have been quietly slipped in on us through the character of the oldest child. I resent the imagery that says to black kids that you can make it by standing on the corner saying, 'Dyn-o-mite.'" Good Times producers claimed that Rolle denied ever saying these words, but there were plenty of other quotes that Rolle took complete credit for. For reasons that we'll get into shortly, Rolle had a lot to say about JJ in 1977, giving interviews where she criticized the character of JJ for being an idiot, and that a character like JJ might work on Sanford & Son or The Jeffersons, but he didn't belong in a decent family like on Good Times. Esther Rolle also had a problem with the hat that JJ seemed to always be wearing. During a scene where the family was about to say a prayer before dinner, Rolle and Amos both objected to JJ wearing his hat at the table, something that James and Florida Evans would never allow. But Jimmie Walker insisted that the hat was part of his character. And so, when they shot the scene and JJ was still wearing the hat, Rolle very deftly removed the hat from his head as if that was written into the script. It was not. John Amos had plenty to say about the JJ character as well. Newspapers reported that, according to insiders, Amos was angry that the show was glorifying an obnoxious and immature character. One of those sources said that Amos had been, quote, "spouting his mouth off in a lot of places," and by the end of the 3rd season of Good Times, John Amos was fired. The show's producers claimed that Amos had quit, but Amos himself made it abundantly clear that he was given the boot. And, just like that, Good Times became exactly what Esther Rolle didn't want: another black family on TV without a father. At the start of the 4th season of the show, Florida Evans got the devastating news that James had died in a car accident in Mississippi, dashing the family's plans to move there and finally escape Cabrini-Green, the Chicago housing project where the series was set. By the time Season 5 aired in 1977, Esther Rolle was also gone. The Chicago Tribune's Gary Deeb described her departure with these words. In a Kremlin-like announcement, CBS attributed Rolle's departure to ill health. The network stated, "Because of ill health, Esther Rolle has asked for her release from Good Times, and because of ill health, that release has been granted." Esther Rolle later explained her departure in more detail, stating, "I just had to be relieved of any sense of responsibility for the kind of idiocy that program was perpetuating." I think it's also important to point out that Rolle has said herself that she never had a problem with Jimmie Walker, the actor. Walker has said publicly that he never once spoke a word to Esther Rolle or John Amos off set, and according to Rolle, they didn't have a personal relationship simply because they were very different people. Rolle and Amos didn't hate Jimmie Walker. They just hated the character he played. So, during this season in which Michael, Thelma, and JJ were left to fend for themselves, JJ's character made a quantum leap in terms of maturity, and his Dyn-o-mite catchphrase was deployed a lot less often. Willona stepped up as sort of a surrogate parent to the Evans kids, and Janet Jackson was added to the cast by way of her heartbreaking plotline involving her abusive mother. She remained on the show as Willona's adopted daughter. TV ratings during the parentless season 5 were atrocious, and producers coaxed Esther Rolle back to the set by essentially handing her full control over the scripts. Norman Lear personally offered Esther Rolle full script approval if she would come back, and it worked. With Rolle back in the apartment as Florida Evans, Good Times survived one more season. This gave the series a chance to deliver the ending the Evans family actually deserved. All of them would finally escape the ghetto and move on to brighter futures.